Good evening. This is the November 13th meeting of the Legislative Affairs Committee. Please all rise and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we have two items on the agenda for tonight, and the first one is an ordinance relative to feeding wild animals, wildlife, and birds. I don't know where this came from, but did it come from? Oh, well, then that's who I was looking to call first, Mr. Patch, Councilor Patch. So let's talk about birds.
Okay, you have the original motion there, Ashley?
The original motion is the ordinance. It's on page 16A, packet page 40. It's on packet page 40.
Do you have a list of the committee
Package
members?
page 40?
40.
I only goes up to 35.
I don't think I have page 40.
We only go up to 35. Well, like 16A?
Okay, the members of this committee are Councilor Keefe, Councilor Morabito, Councilor Patch, and Councilor Powers, and of course, Councilor Zambuto is the chairman.
Okay,
Councilor Patch.
the purpose of the ordinance change is, as we know, the city's been has had a big problem with the rat population, and there's nothing in the ordinance that would. We have I had a complaint of somebody that would daily go out in the driveway and throw a loaf of bread and feed the pigeons, which also creates another problem. But anyways, then you have the rats and the pigeons fighting over the bread. So there was no way. I put my complaint in with the health department, and we saw that in the ordinance there was no penalty for feeding the birds. No, I'm not. They can still do, as you see the ordinance, they can have their bird feeder, but they can't actually go out there and throw food on the ground. So they're leaving it for the rats to eat. So that was the purpose of the ordinance. It's just we're trying the best to solve not only in my ward. I believe all the ward office councilors are having the same problem. A more consistent complaint of the increase of rat calls. I should say rodent. I probably would be better. So I'm just trying. We started with the covers, with the way they store their trash. You know, any little way to increase the food source for the which we know is the main reason you have the rodent problem is I think is better for the city. So that's the purpose of the change of the ordinance. It will fine people if they don't obey the rules, and that's basically it. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Patch. Any other councilors want to add to this? Councilor Morabito.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is, Council Patch, would you be looking to extend this or amend this motion so DCR can control the beach? Because we don't have control over the beach, feeding birds on the beach, technically.
No, unfortunately, we don't, as you probably have constantly got attacked at Kelly's. We don't have the control there. But as far as my ward in West Revere, we can control that if, or at least one area here where this is a problem, feeding the birds. They can feed the birds if they want to get a bird feeder, put it off the ground, put it up, and, but
I guess my misunderstanding from your comments, I'm not sure if you're looking to implement this citywide. Revere Beach is part of the city, but we do not enforce ordinances on the beach. So I guess my question is, are you going to amend this so we send a letter out to DCR and asking them to enforce it as well?
well, I'd gladly do that. I'd leave it open to the Madam Clerk if is that possible?
It's my understanding that you're already not allowed to feed, wildlife on Revere Beach. It's already
Okay.
enforced.
Okay.
I don't know the specific, regulation that DCR follows for their jurisdiction, but this particular ordinance would apply to City of Revere property and private property within the City of Revere.
Thank you.
Councilor Rotundo.
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly with Council Patch. The question comes down to the enforcement portion of it. How does it get enforced? We've got a motion before us tonight. The question comes down to how do we enforce it? And, I'm all for good intentions, and I'll sign on to good intentions. The question is, how do we enforce it? We have a hard time enforcing, people who put up roofs on the weekends and things of that nature. So what can we do to dedicate a group of people to deal with this issue is, I think, the next question. So once we go from this point where we're going to put this as an ordinance, how do we affect the enforcement of it?
Councilor Patch, you want to respond to that?
Yes. What happened with my case was that I put it in a 311 on the person that was feeding the pigeons, when using the bread in his driveway, and they went down. The health department was willing to go down, but they told me they had no way to punish if the person didn't want to apply to the law or the request. There was no way of stopping them. So I wanted to create a way for them to be able to enforce this. Thank you.
Is that good enough for you, Councilor Rotundo?
Yeah, that's perfect. The other thing I would ask for is perhaps even education. Maybe send something out via email or some other form of education, both in Spanish and in Arabic, because, these are groups within our community that have a history of enjoying wildlife and so forth, and perhaps this might be something to think about.
Councilor Novoselsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I've had the same situation even within the last 2 weeks. I had some neighbors down in the Garfield area complain about some renters, and it's not even owners of a home, so that's another issue. We finally decided to send the tenants a letter through the city telling them that it's not appropriate to feed the birds because the reasons because of the rodents, because of the animals that come out, the skunks, the raccoons, and whatever. So, I would like to make when we get down to the final thing under enforcement, which Councilor Rotundo was talking about, that we don't separate the private property from public property, and that we allow inspectional services and animal control to be able to violate either or. So that, you know, if somebody is doing it on the property, the animal control guys can do it, or the inspectional services can do it. If it's on public property, same thing. And now you have two entities handling multiple situations. You know, it's difficult to say, oh, this guy, you know, the animal control person may say, oh, listen, I can't handle that, that's up to someone else. Now we can get either one of them to handle. So my proposal, when we get down to changing the wording on this, to allow inspectional services and the animal control to enforce the provisions of this chapter, and that these violators be issued a 40U, if I'm correct, a 40U citation, so they would get fined for it. Now, another thing is on the fines, you know, it says not less than 25 and not more. Who determines, you know, what the number was going to be? Excuse me. Yeah.
Councilor Novoselsky, those fines were provided to me by Nicholas Catanazzo.
Okay, so,
That's the fine structure under 40U.
so ISD would determine at any point, say if someone did the first time, it would be 25, then maybe 100, then maybe 250, whatever it may be, but they would determine that. So, you know, I think this is a great idea. It gives us a little more meat and to handle a serious problem. Because just by feeding the birds isn't a problem like, you know, the rodents and the other animals are. Thank you.
Any other councilors? Councilor Guanasso.
Well, Mr. President, I think this is very valid reasoning for preventing this, based on the fact that bird droppings is very hazardous to health. And I know of many occasions where a particular one on Gage Ave, there was a situation going on where an individual was feeding birds, and it was bringing to the whole neighborhood birds from all over, and squirrels and all kinds of wildlife that really were raising havoc with the neighborhood and destructing people's properties along with it. So I think this is a good motion, and I think it's a good ordinance that we pass it forward and approve this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. Anybody else? Any other councilors? I just, I'll add my 2 cents to this. I'm certainly in favor of it. I think it's a great motion, and I think that we certainly need to do something. My biggest fear is that we don't get an educational package out there that's adequate. I mean, we really have to educate the public. You know, I know that even my own immigrant family, grandparents and whatever, would come over, always fed birds, and I know the new immigrants are doing the same thing. And I don't think we can just flat out start fining people. We got to get an educational program out there. So I don't know what kind of a grace period we're going to put in with this, but I'd like to see something substantial. I'd like to see more than that, a substantial educational piece, TV. Councilor Rotundo mentioned different languages. I think we need to get this to all, especially the immigrant community. And I'm not singling them out, except that they probably are the biggest abusers because that's something that's been done for years in their culture. So I think that's what we need to do, is get a big piece. And I don't know how we go about that, but we really, maybe it starts at the schools, but schools, TV, literature, in the tax bills, in reverse 911, whatever it takes. But we need to educate the people about this. But I'm certainly in favor of it, and I think it's a great motion, as long as we do it correctly. What do we do here? Yeah, okay, we'll recommend this out favorably from the subcommittee to the city council.
Mr. Chairman, as amended per my recommendations.
As amended.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councilor Powers, I didn't ask you if you wanted, you're all set. Okay, thank you. The next item on the agenda is an ordinance prohibiting non-medical marijuana establishments. And I think Councilor Keefe will probably take the lead on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. this has been a few months coming now, and I know that we started this off, down the road. We were full of fury. I know at least I was, and I was maybe a little bit too outspoken, but as everyone understands my passion behind this, but it's gone through the proper channels. We've had input from our city solicitor, and gone through the open hearing and public process. So I think it's a great step. We're sending the right message to the residents of our city. We're sending the right message to future business in the city, that we're going to take a stance on a certain image-related business in our city, and I'm very happy to get to this point today. And obviously, I'm going to vote very favorably tonight, and I would expect my fellow council members to do the same. And thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Any other councilors wish to speak on this? Councilor Rotundo.
Thank you. As I had asked Paul Capizzi, and obviously, I'd like to get some reference by Ira Zalesnik, excuse me. My concern is that if we put this forward, is there a capability for someone to come forward down the road and sue the city stating that they were not given their 14th Amendment right to commerce? That's a concern for me, therefore basically eradicating this whole thing. So my understanding what could happen is that they would come in, they would say, you gave one person preference, then you took it away, and you denied anybody else thereafter, therefore setting up a monopoly. And that's my concern. Do we fall into a monopoly clause with this? Paul never answered that. That's my only concern. And that would be my only question to Ira, just to keep it in for another week or so, and then, go from there. I mean,
Well,
that's up to you guys.
This is obviously the first step of a two-step process. It would be the ban, and we would have to amend the zoning. In another, we have a public hearing for that in a couple of weeks, I believe, 27th.
I mean, you see my point in this, I think.
Okay, all right, so I suppose we could get that answer and have a meeting next week before the public hearing, if that's not a problem with the maker of the motion.
I'm all in favor of going through the proper channels. I as stated in the time that this has gone through, this wasn't. We have gone through a lot more of detailed steps in getting the right input, and as mentioned, we're following the law as it was written almost to a T. So I feel extremely confident, but I think we could possibly go to the approval process tonight and ask in contingency of any weigh-in from the city solicitor.
Well, I think that I'm pretty comfortable with this as it is, but I don't mind holding it for a week either. It's not.
Sure.
I don't mind having another meeting a week from now, just to make sure we dotted every I and crossed every T.
I'm okay with that as well.
But yeah, I think we're on solid ground. Anybody else? Okay, so we're going to keep this in committee for one more week, and we'll hold a meeting next week. And there's no further business for the Legislative Affairs Committee. So thank you all for your attendance.